sun was low over the horizon, a dull orange that set the dust of Crow's Hollow aglow like embers in a dying fire. The wind carried the dry smell of sagebrush and horse sweat, drifting over the boardwalks where shutters rattled against weathered timbers. Silence hung over the town like a shroud, broken only by the occasional clatter of a tin cup in a saloon doorway. Jedediah Cole stood in the middle of Main Street, his hat pulled low over eyes that had seen more grief than a man ought to. His hands rested lightly on the worn leather of his saddle, fingers tracing the scars left by years of rope burns and gunmetal. Behind him, a fresh mound of earth marked the grave of the woman he had loved, the woman whose name he'd whispered to the wind as he laid her down. Abigail. He had buried her yesterday, and today the wind seemed colder, emptier. The funeral had been quiet, no preacher, no mourners, just the wind and the soft thud of dirt hitting pine boards. Jed's spurs sank into the dust as he looked down the empty street. The town seemed smaller somehow, narrower. He'd sworn, beneath the lonely stars and the scattering of crows overhead, that he would never let himself feel again, that love was a fire that burned everything it touched. The saloon doors creaked as a man passed through, a bottle of whiskey under his arm. Jed watched him go, then slowly turned back to the grave. His hat dipped in the late afternoon sun. "Jed?" The voice was soft, hesitant. He looked up sharply. At the edge of the street, a figure emerged, thin and trembling against the heat shimmer of the desert. Her dress was tattered, dirt-streaked, but her eyes held something bright, something impossibly alive. In her arms, a small bundle moved, and for a moment he thought it was just the wind playing tricks. Then he saw the baby's face, round and solemn, looking at him with a strange familiarity. "Abby?" His voice cracked like dry wood. She took a step closer. "I didn't want to leave him there," she said, her voice catching. Her words faltered, and the baby stirred against her chest. Jed felt something deep in his chest twist, something he thought had died with her. The town was silent. Dust swirled around their boots, as if it too were holding its breath. Jed took a step forward, then another. His hand hovered near his holster, not out of threat, but instinct and fear. "You shouldn't be here," he said, though the words sounded hollow even to him. "I had no choice," she whispered. They were going to take him." Jed's jaw tightened. He remembered the auctions, the men with chains and ledgers, the way women like Abigail were traded like cattle if they dared to refuse the men who owned the law. The sheriff of Crow's Hollow, a fat man named Harris, with grease in his hair and corruption in his veins, had made it clear, a woman alone with nothing could be bought, sold, or thrown out at whim. Abigail had resisted, had fought with teeth and spit, and now here she was, the living proof of that fight, standing before him with their child. Jed's hand found hers without thinking. The baby cooed against her chest. He felt the heat of life in that small body, a tether he hadn't known he needed. "They'll come after him," she said, the edge of desperation sharpening her voice. "Harris, he doesn't care. He killed my father." Jed swallowed. He'd heard whispers about the sheriff, about the backroom dealings, about the men sent out to enforce his will. He had a reputation for being calm, unshakable, a man who weighed each shot before it left the barrel. But the sight of her, alive, and the tiny life in her arms, stirred something he had thought buried beneath years of grief. "They won't take him," he said finally, the words heavier than any bullet he had ever fired. Abigail's eyes filled with tears. She looked at him, really looked at him, and for a heartbeat he thought he saw the woman who had laughed at the creek, who had danced barefoot in the rain before the drought, who had kissed him without fear or regret. The wind shifted, carrying the distant sound of hoofbeats. Jed turned his head. Dust rose in a cloud on the horizon. Riders, 3 of them, silhouettes against the setting sun, their guns glinting. Harris's men. Jed slid his hand to his revolver, the leather grip worn smooth. He didn't speak. Words would be wasted. Abigail shifted the baby, cradling him tight. She knew somehow that he would act, that his quiet strength would rise like the desert heat to protect what was right. The first rider spurred his horse, eyes fixed on Jed. The man sneered, "Cole, step aside and maybe we don't have to hurt the kid." Jed's lips pressed into a thin line. He moved a hand slowly to the rifle slung across his back, the same rifle he'd used to defend his land from rustlers, from outlaws, from men like these. The sun gleamed off the metal, casting a white glare. The horses shifted nervously, the men exchanging uneasy glances. Jed's voice was calm, but low and hard like rock. "Step back," he said. "You go near him and you'll answer for it." A pause, then laughter, sharp and cruel. "You don't scare me, Cole." Jed didn't move. He didn't flinch. Dust swirled at his boots. The baby stirred, sensing the tension in the air. Abigail gripped his arm. Then Jed acted. It was emotion honed by years of survival, quick, precise, deadly. A shot rang out. The nearest rider jerked in the saddle, his horse rearing before collapsing in a cloud of dust. The second man's eyes widened, and Jed's rifle spoke again. Silence fell over the street heavier than before, filled with the smell of gunpowder and sweat. The third man turned, then ran. Jed didn't follow. He lowered his rifle, breathing steady but slow, his pulse a quiet drum against his ribs. Abigail dropped to her knees, holding the baby close. "You saved us," she whispered. "I didn't do it for thanks," Jed said, his voice hoarse. "I did it because it had to be done." For the next few days, Jed moved with her and the child through the desert, following old trails, avoiding the townsfolk who might recognize him, staying ahead of Harris's men. On nights, the wind carried a mournful whistle across the dunes. Jed would sit by the fire, the baby sleeping in Abigail's arms, and stare at the flames, thinking of the grave he had left behind, thinking of how fragile life was, how easily it could be snatched away. Abigail spoke little, but her presence was a balm to the silence. Sometimes she would hum a tune, soft and broken, and Jed would feel the tight coil in his chest loosen a fraction. He thought of her laughter, of the creek, of the small joys they had shared before the world became cruel. One night a sandstorm blew in. The wind howled like a chorus of ghosts. They huddled together in a small cave, the baby between them, and Jed held her hand. "They'll never give up," she said. "Harris, he'll come back." Jed nodded, eyes fixed on the swirling sand. "Let him," he said. "We'll be ready." The confrontation came at dawn. Crow's Hollow was quiet, the town holding its breath. Jed rode into the street, the baby safe in a sling against Abigail's chest. Harris waited, fat and smug, flanked by men who had no stomach for the fight they were about to face. Jed dismounted slowly, boots crunching on the dust. The baby stirred, and Abigail looked at Jed with a mixture of fear and trust. Harris spat into the dirt. "Cole, thought you could hide behind a woman and a child?" Jed didn't answer. He didn't need to. His eyes, cold and steady, told the truth. There was nothing in the world he would not do to protect them. The men tensed, guns half drawn. A shot rang out, not from Jed, but from one of Harris's own, a nervous hand twitching. Chaos erupted. Jed moved with the inevitability of death, precise and merciless. When it was over, the street was quiet again, filled with smoke and the scent of blood. Harris lay on the boardwalk, defeated, his men scattered, leaving the town to its silence. Jed looked at Abigail, at the baby, the weight of everything pressed down on him, the grief, the violence, the relentless cruelty of the world. And yet, for the first time since the grave of his wife, he felt a fragile thread of hope. They rode out of Crow's Hollow together, leaving the dust and the corruption behind. The desert stretched endlessly, indifferent, but alive with the possibility of something better. Jed didn't speak, and neither did Abigail, but the quiet between them was not empty. It was filled with the steady rhythm of survival, of love reborn in the harshest soil. And in that silence, Jedediah Cole, cowboy, mourner, guardian,